Red cherry shrimp are incredibly hardy, yet get their water parameters wrong and your colony can quickly die off. In this video, I'm going to discuss the water parameters that matter and share how you can ensure your shrimp tank water allows your red cherry shrimp colony to thrive. Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Richard and I'm the author of the Nia Karadina Shrimp Handbook. So which shrimp are we talking about in this video? And we're talking about red cherry shrimp and other members of the Nia Karadina shrimp family. That's your black rose shrimp, your green jades, your blue diamonds, your orange realies, any member of the Nia Karadina shrimp family. What we're not talking about is Karadina shrimp, your crystal shrimp, your bee shrimp, etc. The subject of this video is just the Nia Karadina shrimp. So what do we mean by water parameters and why do they matter? Well, water parameters are essentially the makeup of your water, the specific conditions of your water. All fish and shrimp have a set band of parameters that they're happy to live in. Some are fussier than others. Whilst there are dozens and dozens of different water parameters we could measure, the only ones that really matter are water temperature, the pH, the GH or general hardness, the KH or carbonate hardness, the ammonia, the nitrite and the nitrate levels, and to a far lesser degree, the TDS or total dissolved solids. Let's start by discussing water temperature. Fortunately for us, red cherry shrimp are happy to live in a really wide band of water temperatures. They are perfectly happy living in water that ranges anywhere from about 59 to 86, which is about 15 degrees to 30 degrees Celsius. In my time keeping shrimp, I've kept them in just about every single temperature range. I've kept them in both heated and unheated tanks. I've kept them as low as the mid 60s and I've kept them as high as the very early 80s. And I know they can be stretched slightly further even than that. What shrimp really want when it comes to temperature, and in fact, when it comes to all water parameters, is stability. Your shrimp will be quite happy living in the low 60s, providing the water stays in the low 60s. They'll be quite happy living in the mid 80s, providing the water stays in the mid 80s. The problem we have with keeping cherry shrimp is when at 1 minute the temperature is in the low 60s. Perhaps it's in an unheated tank in the room, and during the day when the sun rises and the sun shines in through the window, the temperature in that tank rises during the day and maybe hits the mid 70s. Then come the evening when the sun has set and the house cools down, the temperature comes straight back down again. The next day the sun shines and up the temperature goes, and the temperature's swinging from one to the other to one to the other. That's where we have a problem. Shrimp love stability. And in fact, that theme will continue through every single parameter we discuss today. They can live in a wide band of parameters. They are incredibly hardy, but they do crave stability. Now, for some of us, the best way to achieve that stability in temperature is to add an aquarium heater. An aquarium heater will usually come on when the temperature drops too low, bringing it up to whatever point you've set it to. And once it gets to about that temperature, switch off. Meaning instead of the temperature swinging wildly throughout the day and night, it tends to stay in a very narrow band. And that is what shrimp love. Now, I keep my shrimp in a temperature controlled room. I don't heat the individual tanks, I heat the room. But the ultimate outcome is the same. The temperature of the water in my tanks remains stable day and night. And that is what shrimp love. The next parameter we need to look at is the pH. And pH stands for potential of hydrogen, or sometimes referred to as the power of hydrogen. And it's essentially a measure of how acidic or alkaline the water we keep our shrimp in is. Now, pH is measured on a scale from 0 to 14, with 0 being highly acidic and 14 being highly alkaline, and 7, slap bang in the middle, is considered neutral. Now, red cherry shrimp are happy in water which has a pH of anywhere from about 6.5 as high up as 8. And again, providing that pH remains more or less stable on a daily and weekly basis, your shrimp will be absolutely fine. Now, measuring the pH of your shrimp tank is a little trickier than measuring temperature, but there are essentially two main ways we can measure the pH. One is with a liquid test kit like this API Master test kit, and that just involves adding a small sample of water to a test tube, adding a few drops of the agent, and then giving it 3 or 4 minutes, and you can tell the pH of the water by comparing the test tube to the small color card. The other way to measure the pH of the water is using some test strips like these Escher Aqua test strips. There are a number of different test strips on the market, And test strips are super simple. You literally dip the test strip in the water for a few seconds, shake off the excess, wait for 60 seconds, and then compare the test strip to the colors on the card, and that will tell you the pH of your water. Now, the third parameter we need to look at today is the GH, or the general hardness of your water. And GH is essentially a measurement of the calcium and magnesium ions in your water, or to put it a bit less sciencey, how hard or soft your water is. The more calcium and magnesium ions you have in your water, the harder the water is. The fewer you have, the softer the water. Now, one of the easiest ways to tell whether your water is hard or soft is, do you get calcium deposits around the top of your tank? Do you end up with calcium deposits around the taps in your home? If you do, the chances are you have hard water. If you don't, if you never see these tide marks at the top here, the chances are you have softer water. But again, a liquid test kit or test strips will tell you the GH, or the general hardness of your water. Now, red cherry shrimp like their water fairly hard. They like quite a lot of dissolved calcium and magnesium in the water. In fact, anywhere from 4 to 10 degrees of general hardness is considered about right for red cherry shrimp. Now, when it comes to measuring GH and KH, we aquarists like to make things as difficult as we can, and we have two different systems depending on where in the world we are. I just gave you the measurement in degrees of general hardness, or DGH, but it's also sometimes measured in ppm, or parts per million. And red cherry shrimp want their GH to be around 70 to 180 ppm, or parts per million. Now, don't worry too much, but if you find yourself in a conversation with somebody and you know you're reading in DGH and they're giving their reading in ppm, then there's a simple way to convert it, assuming you have a calculator, and that is to multiply or divide the number by 17.9, depending on whether you want to go from DGH to ppm or back the other way. Now, as I say, red cherry shrimp do like their water fairly hard. And if you find you have soft water, if you find you don't have sufficient dissolved calcium or magnesium in your water, luckily, all you need to do is add a small quantity of crushed coral to your shrimp tank, and that crushed coral will slowly dissolve, releasing calcium into your water and bringing up the general hardness, making it a much happier place for your cherry shrimp to live. Now, the fourth parameter we need to give consideration to is the carbonate hardness, or the KH of the water. And whilst this sounds similar to the GH, or the general hardness, it is in fact a slightly different measurement. The KH is a measure of the carbonates and bicarbonates in your water. Now, why does this matter? Why do we care what the KH of our water is? Well, the KH is sometimes referred to as the tank's buffering capacity, and it's essentially the water's ability to prevent the pH from swinging wildly. Now, when we've been talking about water parameters, I have said that red cherry shrimp love stability. They can live in a wide band, but they really want, wherever they are, to remain more or less stable. And the KH, or the carbonate hardness of your aquarium, is what prevents the pH from swinging wildly over a short space of time. The higher the KH, the more stable your pH will be and the happier your red cherry shrimp will be. The lower the KH, the higher the chance the pH will swing, giving you unhappy, miserable cherry shrimp. In an ideal world, your cherry shrimp want their KH to be in the region of 2 to 8 degrees of carbonate hardness, or about 40 to 140 parts per million. Now, three other parameters we might measure are the levels of ammonia, nitrites, and nitrate in the water. And these three are all interlinked. Ammonia is highly toxic to fish and shrimp. And ammonia is caused either when our fish and or shrimp go to the bathroom, or if uneaten food or dead fish or shrimp begin to break down. They release ammonia. And ammonia is really, really toxic. If you have an ammonia spike in your tank, it can kill your fish and shrimp really quickly. So we always want our ammonia to be at 0 ppm. There should be no ammonia in your tank at any one time. So how do we prevent ammonia building up in our tanks? Well, fortunately, when our fish and shrimp go to the bathroom, or if there is some uneaten food in the aquarium breaking down, there's a naturally occurring form of bacteria that break down the ammonia and convert it to the slightly less toxic nitrite. Now, nitrite is less toxic than ammonia, but will still fairly quickly kill your fish and shrimp. And again, we really want our nitrite levels to be at 0. If you are reading nitrite on any test kit, the chances are your fish or shrimp will be suffering. Now again, we're incredibly lucky because there is another naturally occurring strain of bacteria that will take that nitrite and break it down into the far less toxic nitrate. Now, depending on who you talk to, our fish and shrimp can handle different levels of nitrates. Now, some die-hard purists will tell you your nitrate level should be at 0 at all times. In my experience, that simply isn't the case. In fact, this is probably going to prove to be controversial. I am quite happy if my nitrates hit as high as 100 ppm. That doesn't worry me in the slightest. In fact, if you live in Europe, if you live within the EU, your water can legally come out of your taps at up to 50 ppm, 50 parts per million nitrates. So some of us, myself included, we have no chance of ever getting this water down to 0 ppm of nitrates because the water coming into me could already be as high as 50. So nitrates in very high levels will prove toxic to your fish and shrimp. But in my experience, you don't need to worry until you're pushing over 100 ppm. And in fact, if you add live aquarium plants to your tanks, they consume nitrates as they grow. So by having live plants growing in your tank, the chances are your nitrate levels won't climb to a point that is detrimental to your fish and shrimp. Now, the final parameter I want to talk about today is probably the most misunderstood of all the water parameters, and that is the TDS, or the total dissolved solid. Now, in my experience, TDS is probably the most pointless parameter for us to measure. The TDS of your tank is the total dissolved solids, and what that means is everything that is dissolved in your water would be measured with a TDS pen. If you take a TDS pen and just start shoving it in these tanks and go, oh, 120, oh, 70, oh, 90, that doesn't tell us anything at all. Anyone who tries to convince you that sticking a TDS pen into your shrimp tanks gives you a reading is quite frankly talking hogwash. A TDS pen is fabulous if you take RO water, reverse osmosis water, that you are mixing up for your shrimp tanks and then adding a set amount of salts and minerals to make it a specific way for your shrimp, then a TDS pen is marvelous. It tells you the exact makeup of the water you have created, allows you to set it just right. But if you just start dropping your TDS pen in your fish tanks, it's going to read the dissolved calcium and magnesium and in fact nitrates and fertilizer and maybe dechlorinator and absolutely anything that is dissolved in your tank, hence TDS, total dissolved solids. So total dissolved solids is definitely a parameter you should not worry about. So you could go as far as to say that worrying about TDS is a myth of shrimp keeping. And as it happens, I made a video recently that discusses another 7 myths all about shrimp keeping, and you can watch that video next. Thanks for watching.